can't tell you how happy I am to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Terry Turner, as today's Education Grand Rounds speaker. Terry and I go way back, working on several projects together, and I can tell you that I've learned a lot from her, and I hope that you will too. Dr. Turner is a tenured professor of pediatrics at Baylor College of Medicine, where she serves as the Martin I. Loren Endowed Chair in Medical Education, Vice Chair of Education, Associate Director of Health and Education, and Founding Director of the Center for Research, Innovation, and Scholarship in Medical Education for the Department of Pediatrics. Dr. Turner completed her undergraduate degree at Oklahoma State University, her medical degree at the University of Oklahoma College of Medicine. She did her categorical pediatric residency at Baylor College of Medicine, as well as her fellowship in academic general peds. So you can see that Dr. Turner is not only an advocate of educating others, but herself as well. It continues. Dr. Turner also earned her MPH from the University of Texas Health Sciences Center in Houston and her Master's of Education from the University of Houston. Dr. Turner is passionate about translating the art and science of education into the clinical learning environment. At her core, Dr. Turner is fervent about helping others succeed in their roles as teachers and educational scholars. She's a teacher who is in the trenches and has won numerous awards for her teaching skills, curricula, and program development. She was the inaugural recipient of the Academic Pediatric Association Mid-Care Teaching Faculty Award, and most recently, she was the recipient of the 2018 American Academy of Pediatrics Education Award. Dr. Turner is a consummate educator and learner. I look forward to learning along with you from her today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Terry Turner. Thank you all, and I just want to welcome you and thank you for giving up your lunch hour to join us on this journey. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a passion of mine to talk about medical education, but most importantly to talk about the things that we can do to enhance the learning of our trainees, because that's why we're all here. So I'd like to get us started by doing a little bit of a think, pair, share. I want you to turn to your neighbor and think about the things that a teacher did that created a positive learning environment for you. So what are some of the things that a teacher that you really admired, could be anywhere along your career, but that they did that enhanced your learning? So I'm going to let you get started. That positive learning environment.
Fire away. So what things?
I was thinking Jack's he did that same for his sister. He's really scared at her, and we take you into the quiet room right after your shift because I already have it. And like he's like aggressive, like but she was trying to think that like maybe she was trying to be fine. Yeah, he didn't know. I try not to yell at well, it's private feedback. They let me front of yeah, I'm trying to. I really like to think about it. I think you should get better. Well, I'd say a long time. I know. I mean, I never had yeah, I mean, nobody provides when you go to
All right, I think we'll come back to the large shift.
There was a lot of discussion and buzz in the room. What were some of the things that were really helpful, that created that positive and learning environment for you all? Yeah.
There was this energy from this person that I just wanted to be in their circle. That I wanted, that's what lit the fire in my belly, even though that wasn't what I was searching for. That it was, oh, there's somebody who's really passionate. I want to be passionate too.
So that passion, energy. Other thoughts? Yes.
I guess participation, the more the students can participate, or the faculty will help the students engage.
So engaged you in the learning process. And when we think about this, is we're going to talk about 7 habits to create this personal learning environment. I'm going to imagine you've hit many of these habits. Where this talk really originated is we had a residence as teacher session for some new medical students joining Baylor College of Medicine, and they were going to be interns teaching students. And we had residents that led the session, and they were giving teaching tips to the students, the new interns, about ways that would really help the students learn. And then one of the residents said, you really need to know your student's name. And what happened at that moment, for me, was transformational, because people started clapping, catcalling, and literally we had a standing ovation. And to me, that was so pivotal in my understanding of this topic, of what's important to our learners. So the next thing that I did was we had our intern retreat coming up in a couple of months. So I engaged, these were my new learners last year. These are my interns, these are their names. And I said, what would be, I want you to write a postcard to the faculty about one thing they can do to enhance your learning environment over the coming year. And this talk is informed by these 2 experiences that I had, and also talking with other educational leaders to find out and looking into the literature about what makes a positive learning environment. You're going to see a lot of these quotes. These come from my learners. A professor knowing your name makes you feel as if you're a part of the process rather than just being swallowed by it. So with a show of hands, how many of you all teach in the clinical setting? Any type of learner, teach in the clinical setting. How many of you all teach in more of a classroom setting? Okay, so we have a little bit of both. And these techniques that we're going to talk about are beneficial to either. So we're going to talk about what are those things to create a positive learning environment. This is not an extensive review of the medical education literature, but it's science and actionable items. So you have handouts, and there's several different things that's listed under each of the 7 habits of things that one might do to create a positive learning environment. I encourage you to either take notes, to make notes beside those, because at the end I'm going to ask you to identify one behavior that you would like to do in the next week or in the next month to create that positive learning environment. The other thing is I like to use literature from other fields. So if you're thinking this is all from medical education, I'm most informed through K through 12, business literature, psychological literature, and the sociology field. And that's really about the integration of how we can learn from others. And the very first is how important our name is. And think about it. Sometimes you turn when you've heard your name called and it wasn't even, the person wasn't trying to find you, but our names are so powerful. They oftentimes have familial or cultural meaning to us. And it's where we have to start. Our name is part of who we are. And that's why we start with this particular topic. When you think about the power of names, the research talks about how it affects attitudes in a course. It changes where a learner is more likely to seek help if you know their name. And it really affects their perceptions, not only about you as the teacher, but also about the course. One of my trainees said, when I felt that a personal connection, when I felt I had a personal connection with my faculty preceptors, it makes me want to do better. It's almost as if I'm extra accountable. Another is if they cared enough to remember my name in such a large class, it showed me that they cared about my experience in the class and education. I've been told that from individuals, I'm just not good at memorizing names or knowing names. And I tell people it's a skill. It's something that takes practice. I keep note cards. I have, I think, 65 new learners each year, and I make little flashcards that I review on an airplane, usually in May, with their pictures, their names, and also something about them that's unique or that I'm going to remember and want to talk about. Because when we think about what are the hierarchy of needs, this is not unique to medical education. This is unique to us as individuals. This is that hierarchy, and we have to start with the physiological and then the safety before we can work up to the belonging and esteem and some of the higher level needs that one has. And think about it, if you're in a room trying to learn and the room is too hot or too cold, you can't focus on the learning. So you have to step up each of these levels. If you do not feel safe in the learning environment, you're not likely to learn. So we had a conference on the learning environment to identify what were the components, what were the main components, and these were the 6 that came up. And of these 6, we're going to talk about the latter 3. We're going to talk about the educational, the psychological, and the socio-cultural. I'll tell you that all of these influence inclusivity and as a part of that. So if you think about it, there is a magical day out there where a student becomes a professional. For physicians, there's this magical day that one day they were a medical student and poof, the next day they magically become a doctor. And despite the fact that they have doctor before their name, they are still growing in their professional identity in that role. And it's how do we help them become that professional? I reflected on the fact that when I interview medical students for a position at our training program, I will sometimes or many times say, I hope that you choose our training program as your educational home. And I reflected on why did I use the word home? Because that's a little unusual. Why didn't I just say training program? And when I looked at the definition of what home is, it's more than 4 walls and a roof. Home should be a place of safety and security, a place of belonging and nurturance, where individuality, self-esteem, and confidence grow. Home is the place where trainees evolve into their best selves. And that's what we're really trying to create, that place where they can evolve into their best selves. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is assess where we are. Using that quality improvement model, taking a baseline snapshot. These are some surveys. You don't have to do surveys. You might just ask, doing a focus group among the different people that make up your learning environment. There are ones around team learning and psychological safety. Those came out of the business field. But it's really important because our learning environment, if you're practicing in the clinical environment, affects patient outcomes. So as we shift into this, what are some things that we can actually do as faculty? And I liberally took from Franklin Covey. How many of you all have either read about or heard about the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? It's a classic out there. So I've taken liberally to create 7 habits to create a positive learning environment. So they may not align one for one, but they really emphasize those things that I can do. And I also purposefully use the word habits, because habits are subconscious or unconscious behaviors that we do repeatedly. And this is something that we want to do in our learning environment. It shouldn't be a one-time intervention. These should be habits, culture, that we create in our learning environment. Now, these are the 7 habits. What I've also done is try to give icons so that when we talk about each of these habits, I'll put that icon. It just kind of gives you a visual reminder of what we're talking about. But when you look at it, we have develop a growth mindset, putting the E back in medical education, building rapport. The pump is setting learners up for success, being a supermodel, valuing the learner at the center of what we do, and then promoting a sense of value. So we're going to start with growth mindset. I like to start with this one because to me this is where it all begins. A mindset is a way of thinking. And the one person I can influence in their way of thinking is myself. So I like to start by telling a story. So in the 1960s, Rosenthal et al. Did a study, and they did this with grade school children. So this is not a medical education study. It's one done with grade school children. They administered a test to these grade school children to identify which ones would intellectually bloom over the coming year. And then what they did is they gave the children that would intellectually bloom, based on their test scores, to this group of teachers. And they said, you've got the students that are going to intellectually bloom over the coming year. They gave another group of students that were going to do well, but maybe their rate of learning wasn't going to be as steep as the intellectual bloomers, and they told the teachers, you've got these children. And then they looked after 1 year at the outcomes between these two groups. And guess what? Those that were supposed to intellectually bloom blossomed. Their rate of learning was so high. And the ones that were going to do normal did normal. Now you're probably thinking, why am I telling this story? That's what we expected. The twist in this is that there is no test to tell whether or not someone can intellectually bloom. It was fabricated. It was a normal IQ test. And these researchers randomly chose children. And put them into different groups. Those that were designated as intellectually would bloom were no different than the ones in the other classroom. What was different? The teacher's expectations. So this is called the Pygmalion effect. If you've ever seen My Fair Lady, this is talked about in My Fair Lady, but it's how our beliefs as teachers influence our expectations of our learners, which ultimately influence our behavior, which influences the results that we get from our learners, which reinforces our beliefs. I was telling someone I do a lot of work around remediation, and I do a talk on setting up to fail, because I do think sometimes we set our learners up to fail when they're in remediation, because we already know they failed. But this is one on what are attitudes, what are behaviors that we as teachers can do. So they examined what did those teachers do in those schools that was different than in the classes where they had the normal children. And what they found is that these teachers were nicer to the children. They taught more material. They expected more. They also praised more often, gave them more questions to answer, let them talk more, and then gave them more feedback, both praise as well as feedback to get them to the right answers. And these are called silent messages that I, as a teacher, am doing subconsciously because I believe I have the intellectual bloomers. So this has informed a lot of the work around mindset. How many of you all have heard of growth mindset? Raise your hands. This is very popular in both the K through 12, higher education, as well as the sociology and the psychological literature. And it comes around, we're going to start with the mindset quiz. Regarding intelligence, what percent out of 100 is effort, and what percent is ability? So turn to your neighbor and just talk about what percent do you think is effort and what percent do you think is ability?
What do you think? It's hard to quantify
people who maybe struggle with
Okay. What were some of the percentages that you guys threw out for effort? Just throw out a number. 80-20. Other thoughts? Well, what they found is when Carol Dweck interviewed hundreds of thousands of individuals across all spectrums, she came up with two groups of people. Now, this is a dichotomy that's really not a dichotomy. We're all kind of on the spectrum. But those who were called growth mindsets believed that 65% of intelligence, at least, was related to effort. In other words, these are not fixed abilities. These are things that we can grow with effort. It's the power of yet. So I was told by, I was a mid-career faculty writing some research papers, and my mentor came up to me one day and he said, "Do you have a learning disability?" I know, that's what I thought. And I said, "No, I don't have a learning disability. I just haven't been writing a lot yet. I'm going to get better. I need you to teach me." Luckily, this was my former program director. I love him to pieces. And I said, I need help with my grammar. But that's that whole process. It's not that I was a bad writer. I just wasn't there yet. And that's the power of yet, because this is what distinguishes a growth versus fixed. It's how we view the world. When you think about it, is the world in my control? If I can work harder and work differently, then that means I can grow and get better. How do I look at failures? I have failed so many times. I even ran for a position at a national office and I lost not one, but twice. And I won on the third time. Took a lot to get up to do it the third time when people were saying, "Do you think you can really win? You've lost 2 other times in a row." And I said, "Well, what's the worst that's going to happen?" The other is our goals and how we look at goals. Am I, as a student, out there to show you what I can do to achieve that grade? Or am I out there to improve my communication skills so that I can be better with patients? This one is a mastery goal for me to be better versus a performance goal, because I want to look good and not stupid. And that goes along with that fixed mindset. Why is this important? I had a subspecialty fellow. This is someone who's been through medical school successfully, residency successfully, and was now in their second year of a 3-year fellowship, and they were getting ready to get rid of her. I'm thinking, it's a subspecialty we don't have very many of. Why would we want to do that? She's been successful for the other 2 years, and they said, we worked with her, and she's just not competent enough. And I said, well, what's something she does well? I said, her patients love her. She is wonderful at communication. That was my thought. Like, why do we want to get rid of someone who's wonderful with communication? She needed someone to help guide her in how to present, how to interact. Actually, I feel like I didn't do anything other than believe in her. She was a great communicator. We started there. Her patients loved her. And this concept, they said, well, she doesn't read enough. I asked her, and she goes, I read all the time. I said, okay, let's make sure they know that you read. So when you present a patient, and when you get to your management plan and you say, I want to use X drug, say, I'd like to use X drug because in my reading last night in pediatrics, Smith talked about this having the best outcomes. That, and I put her in a different environment with different teachers to build her up and give her a different experience. She did well. She graduated, and we've got another subspecialist. So this is something, and I start with growth mindset. I spend a lot of time on this because it's one thing I have in my power. It's what I believe about my learners. And if I believe that they can succeed, what are those behaviors that I can do to help set them up for success? Teaching about growth mindset is something very simple that we can do. We've started doing that at our institution because it's been found that when you take college students, particularly underrepresented minorities and those who are in social economic disadvantage states, whether it's classes, etc., just learning about growth mindset improves their outcomes. It's also praising for effort, not praising for their innate ability, but praising for the effort that they put forward, and discussing your own journey and sharing those stories of failure. I certainly didn't start as a wonderful pediatrician. I have been fired by faculty, by patients. I still have a lot of growth. And when my learners hear that I'm not there yet, that I keep working on it, that helps let them know that it's okay. Then the next habit is putting the E back in medical education. And I think this probably is more pertinent to the clinical learning environment when you're talking about graduate medical education, nursing education, where they're in a clinical learning environment and they're apprenticing, because one of their jobs is to take care of patients. And one of the things I realized is that I don't have a clue what my learners are going through, mainly because when I trained, it's been a few years ago. I'd like to say it was just yesterday, but it wasn't. And so I don't know the patients are taken care of. I may not understand the systems that they're going through. So I've started going on rounds and asking a lot of questions. Tell me about this. And plus, me having to write notes, making sure they get done in the time that the residents are allotted. And I'm a skilled physician, and if I can't do it, then are we expecting too much? But this has been very helpful to inform me and think about it. Flexner, back in the early 1900s, did this to understand what it was like to go back to medical school. And this informed a lot of the work that we do. I hear a lot from my learners that I'm just a scribe because they don't feel like they're contributing to the education of their patients. They don't feel like they're contributing to the outcomes. They feel like all they do is take orders and write them down. When we think about it, we need to help find meaning. And one of those is why we got into healthcare, most of us, was to be at that patient's bedside. And when you look, we only spend about 16% of our time at the bedside. We spend a large proportion of the time in administrative tasks. And how can we help our learners get them back to being at the bedside? So we decided that we would do focus groups, qualitative research with our trainees. And we used Maslach's and Leiter's burnout in the work environment as our framework because we thought this was a really good one. It's been studied, and these are the 6 things that contribute to burnout in the clinical learning environment. We understood work overload. That one, we knew kind of what that meant, but we didn't know some of these others. And lack of control was one that we really wanted to get a better idea. So this is what we heard. Autonomy gives you a sense of purpose, that you are making decisions and growing as a clinician. There's going to be so many things outside of your control, but if you are allowed to have control safely within your realm of what is expected and safe for the patient so that you can grow, I think that's important. It was that lack of control over what I was doing and over the decisions about patient care that I realized in retrospect really made it unpleasant for me. Not just that I wasn't able to make any decisions, but that no one was even interested in hearing about the decisions that I might make. Another story that came from this is a story where there was one of our first-year trainees, doctors, was taking care of a patient that went into respiratory distress. At our hospital, we have a team that comes in when a child is coding. We have a whole team that comes in. They came into the room. They pushed the learner out and they said, "We need you to wait outside." She's sitting outside, or she's standing outside the room, and she hears the mother say, "Where's my doctor?" The team says, "We're right here. We're here to take care of you. That's why we're here." And she goes, "No. Where is my doctor?" That was her intern. The intern walked back in the room and said, I'm right here, and I'll be by your side. That, she said, I stayed the whole night. That's my patient. I didn't mind that I was breaking duty hours because that's what I'm here for, is to take care of patients. So I want you to turn to your neighbor and just talk about what are other ways that we can help create the why and help our learners find meaning in the work that they do. So turn to your neighbor and discuss for the next minute. All right. What are some of the things that you all came up with to help make those connections or meaning in one's work? I know you had a lot of buzz, so there was ideas coming out of there.
My colleague is shy, but she needs to.
You just got put on the spot.
I did look at it.
Or you could gently tell us what that great idea was to not put it
idea, so.
Actually, it was our idea, but the idea of you may have a way of doing something, and your learner with some experience may want to do something a little different. And as long as that's not a bad thing, it's kind of good to let them do that.
We learn best through personal experience. You heard how this topic came about. I don't know that I would have come up with this if I hadn't experienced those two events. It's also revisiting the why. You may want to have your learners revisit their personal statements. Why did they come in to this? Or writing a letter to their self in 5 to 10 years. It's also challenging these old models of training. So what are things that we could do better? Despite the fact that this is the way we've always done it. I'm sorry, but we are now in almost 2020. And if people from the 18, 17, 1500s from Padua, the very first medical school, walked into our training, I don't know how much difference they would see. But our patients have changed, our training environments has changed. Isn't it time to make that change? So the next habit really goes right into that, because if we start with what we believe, we go to the next about how that we can find meaning, and putting the E back in education. It's building rapport and team relationships, getting to know each other. We are learning and we make mistakes. We are always 10 times more frustrated and embarrassed for our faults than you are. So when you think about it, we also, when you see this learner on the left, how many of you all would want to work with him? So we make assumptions. We make assumptions about this learner. And what we should be doing is saying, are you okay? We all have those days in the clinical learning environment or in the classroom where something's just not going well, and it has nothing to do with this. But it impacts how we care for our patients. And creating that safe learning environment, when I care about the learner first as an individual, I'm creating that psychological safety. If you think about it, our learners feel like they're under a microscope, under constant scrutiny. It would be like if we as teachers throughout our day, every hour of our work, had someone observing us, grading us, evaluating us. That's what they feel. So how can we create that environment that is safer? One of the things is looking at our hierarchies, and we've talked about that implicit biases. Oftentimes we have an affinity bias, meaning we like people who are like us. I said there was a program director that is one who gets on my nerves, and I had not sought to look out for what are those commonalities between us. And when I was going to Vienna, and he said, "Oh, I lived there for 11 years." We sat and talked for an hour. My whole opinion of him is changed. And nothing happened other than I found out he went to Vienna and lived there for 11 years. So finding out what we have in common. Also, having those interventions of belonging, because all of our learners, most of our learners, feel like they're imposters and don't belong. I have the strongest resident I have in my training. She told me the other day, she goes, "I just don't feel like I belong. I'm not good enough." And I'm like, oh my goodness. For you to feel that way? And how can we share these experiences so that they know this feeling is common and it's okay, and it's going to get better over time. It's also letting people know you on a more personal level. So this is me in my younger years when I was teaching my stuffed monkey Zippy how to potty train. And I said maybe that's where my love of teaching and my love of being a developmental behavioral pediatrician came about. So these are all things that we can do. Promoting that psychological safety and building relationships first. Relationships are the most important thing. And getting to know your trainees. So now we're going to talk about setting learners up for success. So what I want you to do, you've got a note card in front of you. I want you to draw a vehicle on that colored note card. So everybody gets a minute to draw a vehicle. So quickly draw that vehicle. You get cards? Okay, you've got another about 10 seconds. So if you haven't got your vehicle drawn, all right. Now what I'm going to have you do is everybody stand up. It's good for the circulation. So everybody stand up. All right. If you drew a car, I want you to sit down. If you drew a bicycle, or you were trying to draw a bicycle, sit down. A boat, sit down. A truck, sit down. A balloon, sit down. Anything other than a rocket, sit down. All right, I want everybody to look around. This is the one person that got the exercise correct. Oh, come on, congratulations. So how did you all feel? Didn't feel very good. I didn't set you up for success.
So I want to know what he said.
Is he planted?
No, he was not planted. Please set expectations at the beginning instead of waiting for us to do something wrong before saying how you want it done. So think about it. Go in and see that patient. But we don't say how long, how to write it up, what we expect them to examine, etc. So these are ways that we can prime the learner. It's priming the pump, meaning getting them ready and setting them up for success. Please remember, I want to be doing the right thing the right way. All of us as humans have 3 basic needs. We want to be competent in whatever we do. We want to be connected. That's the relationship or the relatedness. And lastly, we want to feel like we have some control over the course of our lives. So people don't do things poorly, badly to get on our nerves. They just don't know how or what's expected. And the other thing is when we do observe them in the learning environment, we do point out the things that they do wrong. We're not bad at doing that. In fact, we're very good at pointing out when people do things poorly. But we need to be better at pointing out when they do things well. We should be giving praise 4 times to 1 for every time we correct them. When I'm on rotations and I'm just getting to know a learner, remember, I'm trying to build relationships, so I'm going to identify the things they're doing well. Again, so that they trust me to know that I'm here to support them when things go wrong. It's also about teaching them that success is not a straight line. And you're going to have setbacks, you're not going to know answers, and that's okay. You're not going to do procedures well the first time that you do it. It's going to take you multiple times, and that's okay. And sometimes it's going to get harder before it gets easier. And this brings up, we had a learner that came to our program, and unbeknownst to us, she did poorly in medical school. We were told that after she came to our program, was matched with us, that she actually had several issues, including professionalism issues. Well, she's now mine, meaning she's my trainee. She's in my home. I want to make her the best that can be. So we adjusted her training environment. We gave her a mentor that would support her really tightly to make sure that she excelled. And and I'll tell you, she became one of our chief residents. And again, that's the power of what we can do. It's setting those learners up to success. And not everyone's going to get things at the same rate. It's giving a lot of positive reinforcement before we work on the corrective feedback. And making sure that the learners have time to improve. If we're going to tell them something, they need time to get better. The next habit goes into what we can do as teachers, because all eyes are on us. We are the super role models, because a lot of learning occurs through role modeling. And we had in clinic one of my senior residents who's getting ready to graduate had a patient encounter and yelled at our social worker. And I ended up taking over the patient case because things were not going well in that encounter. And I knew I needed to give that trainee feedback. And I could have gone in and said, you don't yell at the social worker. Somehow I had an epiphany somewhere in that clinic setting, because I was really mad. And between the time I talked with him, and I approached him and said, I just want to tell you that I'm sorry for taking over the case. You're a senior resident, you're getting ready to graduate. I shouldn't have just swooped in and taken over the case. And he goes, no, I need to tell you, I'm sorry for yelling at the social worker. Then that engendered a conversation about, well, what would you do if I wasn't here? What would be your next step? And he automatically went and had a conversation with the social worker. But if I just told him, don't yell, he knew that. It's not something that he didn't know. But in this way, I modeled the way of saying, it's okay, we all make mistakes. This is a safe environment to say we make mistakes. The studies have shown that our trainees in the clinical environment learn more from the observations than they do from actual didactics and teaching. They also learn when it's hindered when they don't see things. So I was really surprised at one point in time when we were talking about a patient case in clinic, and I was saying, yeah, I had to read on this last night and blah, blah, blah. And the learner turned to me and said, you read at night? I was like, yes, I read a lot because I don't know everything. But they'd never seen that. So I would role model looking things up. They go, we don't even know, how do you know where to go, etc. It's also that learners pick things up, and we really want to be conscious about the role modeling that we do. This also includes those negative behaviors, how we interact with staff. That can be our cleaning crews, that can be our nurses, that can be our other faculty, that can be our trainees. If the culture is one of incivility, then that's what you're going to continue to breed. And I'll tell you, most of our cultures don't have verbal abuse and bad, what I consider really big M misbehaviors. It's smaller things. It's things like ignoring the trainees. It is things like interrupting someone when they're giving their presentation. It is body language to where they don't feel like they're wanted. So we really need to be very intentional. I also role model in my patient's room, because these are patients I know well, and I'll say, you know, I've been your doctor for a long time. What are things that I do well and that you want me to continue to do every time I see you? What's one thing you want me to do differently the next time I see you? Wouldn't that be a behavior we'd love to have from all of us? I still learn because each patient's different. So sometimes I think I'm doing a really good job and they go, that just doesn't work for me, Dr. All right, we need to value learner-centeredness. So I want to start by telling a story. So there was two boys and there was a little dog, and one boy said to the other, I taught my dog how to whistle. And the little boy said, you taught your dog to whistle? And he leans down and he listens, and he listens, and he listens. And he doesn't hear the dog whistling. So he says, hey, what's the deal? I thought you said you taught your dog how to whistle. The boy said, I said I taught him how to whistle. I didn't say he learned it. So again, this is all about how do we empower our learners, because it's all about them. It's not about me. It is about how they learn best. And people, when we look at this, they're not going to change their behaviors unless there's a reason to do so. So it is empowering them in their own learning. It's also empowering them in feedback. I oftentimes will say, and I'll even say it myself, you know, I gave them feedback. Why didn't they just get better? I practice general pediatrics. Do you know how many patients I see with who are overweight that I just go in and say, you know, you're overweight. You just need to lose weight. And the parent and the child goes, oh, I didn't know that, Dr. Berner. And that they magically changed, and the next visit they came in and they were normal weight. It's the same way with our learners. Just because we tell them, if it doesn't, you know, these are long-standing habits. You know, I oftentimes hear professionalism issues are the hardest to remediate. They just take a little longer. Doesn't mean they can't be remediated, they just take a little longer. This is a wonderful model for feedback. It's called R2C2. And think about what we've talked about. Rapport building, exploring reactions. So if you do have to give, I mean, when I ask a family and tell them that their child is above the 95th percentile for weight, they have a reaction to that. Sometimes my mothers will say, but this is the one thing I can give my child. So we have to explore those reactions before we can even get to the content or coaching for change. Same way with our learners when they get that negative feedback. So letting learners express their management plans, even if it's not what you would do. We've talked about that as a best practice of creating a positive learning environment, encouraging reflection, and I'm going to emphasize, because I do this a lot, and I didn't realize how non-positive it was. It wasn't so much I talked about the good old days or what we did when I was a trainee, but my younger trainees do not like the word millennial. They do not like, well, you're just a Generation Z, and this is how you learn. They said, we are people too. We are individuals. We are not defined by a generation. So I'm trying to make sure that I focus on the individual, not the generation. All right, now I'm going to have you stand up again. This is our last habit, so everybody stand up. Now get that blood flowing. All right, so for everyone standing, if you have received words of affirmation or other signs of where you felt valued for the work you do in your environment, your clinical environment, today, sit down. If you received it this past week, either words of affirmation or something that made you feel valued in the last week? Sit down. Last month. All right, I'm going to have everyone sit down after that. This is such a valuable, something that we can all do better is provide that affirmation or some portion to make them feel valued. To be understood, to be affirmed, to be validated, and to be appreciated is next to physical survival the greatest need of human beings. We all need it in some form or fashion. How many of you all have heard of the 5 Languages of Love, the books? Well, this is modeled after that. It's the same people. They wrote the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the workplace. And they look at gifts of appreciation, acts of service, quality time. This is celebration. That's why you're seeing hand clapping, although it's also listed as physical touch, but it's celebration, and then words of affirmation. So when you look at the words of affirmation, about half of us, this is our primary language of feeling valued, is words of affirmation. It needs to be authentic. It can't just be something that you say. It really has to have meaning and be specific. You can talk about their traits such as optimism as well, and praise for their accomplishments. One of my attendings on PHM actually did this very well, where she had one day of the week where at the end of rounds, she randomly made us go around the circle and tell each other something that we appreciated that another team member did that week. This isn't just for physicians, this is for the team, because we take care of patients as a team. I can't do it just by myself. It can also be quality time, that focused attention. You see the words from one of my learners. Please take even 2 minutes out of your day to know more than just my name. It's also acts of service. Are there things that we can do for each other? Specifically, I think about, I've been working with the same group of physicians for a long time, and we're very eager when we see someone not doing well. Why don't you go home? Let me cover the rest of these patients. Can we do that for our trainees as well? I tell my trainees, I can write prescriptions, I can put notes in the chart, I can write orders. Don't feel like you have to do it all on your own. Now, tangible gifts and physical touch are less than 6% and less than 1% respectively of a primary language, but they're not what you think. This is from one of my learners. It's not even big things, it's more tangible, like food. When people bring us food, it's like, oh, I realize that you are working hard and I appreciate you. Whenever we get a hard diagnosis in clinic, when one of my trainees nails it, that's why I was saying, nails that diagnosis, we do high fives. Yeah, because celebrate. And that's little things that we can do to show that value. So learn your team members' primary appreciation language. Show appreciation to one coworker a week. Also, don't solely use words of affirmation, because our blind spot is our least favored language. So mine happens to be quality time, which is my least favored language. But it happens to be my favorite language of a couple of coworkers as well as my husband. So I have to work harder to express that in both my work and at home. All right, now then, in the last minute, you've got your handout and it's time for action. So I want you to look at that handout and find at least one behavior that you're going to put into practice in your learning environment over the next week or the next month. So I'm going to let you look at those. You can talk to your neighbor, but just circle one. It doesn't matter. We'll give you a minute to do that.
See, I was trying to affirm, like, it's so
Okay, I'm going to get us back together. And I want to highlight the statement on here. Extraordinary results come from taking ordinary steps every day in the right direction. These are all things that we can do to create a positive learning environment. So I'm curious, what's something that you're going to do over the next week or month? What's something that you are going to take away and try for this next time? Yes.
I like the idea of asking the team that you're working with to express their appreciation for one of the members somewhat regularly.
Other thoughts?
I like that you had mentioned complimenting learners on their attributes, like their optimism. That's probably not something that I think about when you're writing reviews. Like you wrote that H&P well, or you could have asked more ROS or whatever. That things that are more generalizable that probably become a better position.
And think about it, I really appreciated the grit that you showed when that patient fired you, but yet you were able to go into the next patient and literally do it better. Those are things not too many people talk about, and those are things that we can praise. Now, I have taken the liberty, because you all had great conversations, to decrease the time for question and answers. I'll be glad to stay afterwards, but to me this is such an important topic, and we learn as a whole and as a group. These were the 7 habits of things. You've got the handout of things that we can do as educators. Take a walk. Encourage a movement. I'd love to have appreciation in the workplace. So that team that's going to share that appreciation on a regular basis, I bet we're going to see transformation there. And also I want to encourage us to leverage the trainee's voice. They are why we're here. I wouldn't be a teacher if I had no trainees. So leverage their voice and ask them how we can do it better. So thank you guys for coming and spending your noon hour with us.